like the culture is different, the landscape is different. So you can't help but kind of like see it anew with a whole sort of new lens, a new sort of perspective. And this happened to me not that long ago when I was just kind of flicking channels one night, and I came across a film called Beautiful Girls, which was from 1996, and it's a Weinstein vehicle at the height of their of their terrible powers when they were churning out films for Miramax. And so essentially the story is Timothy Hutton plays this sort of young man who's having a kind of midlife crisis. He, can't decide whether he wants to marry his girlfriend or he carry on being a piano player. So he goes home to his hometown, ostensibly for his high school reunion, but also to kind of have this sort of mini little midlife crisis. And he picks up with a lot of the sort of guys that he was friends with in high school, and they too are all having their sort of little mini midlife crisis around relationships and marriage and all that sort of usual stuff. But the thing that really kind of weirded me out when I sort of rewatched this film is his character, the Timothy Hutton character, has a relationship or a sort of infatuation with a young woman who's his next door neighbor, who's played by Natalie Portman, who is 13. And again, this is presented as a sort of, romantic, sort of lovely little sort of moment between the two. And she's sort of saying, wait until I'm, a couple of years from now when I'm, of age and we can have a relationship. And at the time, I didn't even sort of like, when I first saw it, I didn't even twig. And now I watch it and I think, good Lord, how is this like acceptable? Except that it kind of was at the time. And, poor old Natalie Portman, even I think her very first film role when she was in The Professional, I think she was 11 or 12 at the time. And again, she's in this sort of old relationship with an older man who's, this sort of a French assassin played by Jean Reno. This is The Professional. And I watch it again and I just think, this is so, like 20 shades of wrong. And at the time, you had this kind of weird, unsettled feeling, but you didn't quite have the words or the terminology, or again, the correct, I think, almost lens to sort of put that into focus and to be able to kind of say what it was that was really disturbing about the narrative that you were presented with. So, and that fashion film is a really interesting kind of little time capsule because you look back and, to me, 1996 doesn't seem that long ago. But it was in many kind of, we've come a long way since then culturally and in terms of the stories that, are acceptable and the sort of the waters in which we swim, I think have really shifted. So it is interesting to kind of re-look at films in that way and to see how much has changed. And, to be honest, when I first went to university, I think that was probably the very first time that I had actually seen a film made by a woman filmmaker. Up until then, I just don't think I didn't even twig that, all the stories and the media they took in came from a very set perspective, that it was, almost entirely male, but that, almost all films were made by men, written by men, produced by men, critiqued by men, and that was a sort of natural, innate order of things, and that you didn't even know, I think, that there was another sort of point of view available because you just never saw it. You didn't see your story on screen. And the one thing, again, I think that Me Too is really sort of pushed to the fore is to sort of broaden that, that sort of degree of access to people telling their stories. So there is, I think, a lot to celebrate, even though, sometimes it feels like you're sort of 2 steps forward and 4 steps back. But this year in particular, was a very good year for women filmmakers, which I think, we should take our celebrations and our victories where we can get them. And, even Chloe Zhao winning the Golden Globe for Best Director I guess that was last week, for Nomadland. The last time that happened was in 1983 when Barbara Streisand won for Yentl. So there's almost 40 years between, a woman being awarded the Best Director prize at the Golden Globes, which is not great, but we will take it. So it is, again, one of those sort of steps forward. And Nomadland was just one film this year. There was just an extraordinary body of work that was produced. Like, even off the top of my head, I was thinking about, Regina King with One Night in Miami, and Kelly Reichardt with First Cow, and Emerald Fennell with Promising Young Woman, and Kirsten Johnson, who made a film about her dad called Dick Johnson Instead, which is just absolutely phenomenal. I think everybody should watch it. It's on Netflix. So, the list goes on and on and on. And even, something that was not so great, like Wonder Woman, WW84, which Patty Jenkins made and was released earlier this year. It was not a wonderful film, but it did sort of show you that, women can make terrible superhero movies as much as men can. So I guess that's good. I'm not sure. The one film that I did want to talk about tonight is Emerald Fennell's film called Promising Young Woman. Sorry. And this film premiered at Sundance and then got wide release earlier in the year. And it is a very interesting little vehicle. And I'm going to see if I can play the trailer for you. So hopefully this will work again. Just to kind of give, because there may be some people who've seen it and maybe some people haven't, but just to sort of put everybody on a level playing field. So bear with me. We'll get out of here. And all right, where are you? Promising Young Woman. Okay. All right, let's try the sucker again. Okay. Okay, can everyone see that?
What's happened to mine?
Yeah? Okay, gotta play it.
Whisper something in your ear.
Good God almighty. They put themselves in danger, girls like that.
It was a perverted thing to say.
You'd think you'd learn by that age, right?
Please lie down. What are you doing?
It's okay, you're safe.
What are you doing? Hey, I said, what are you doing? Every week, I go to a club. I act like I'm too drunk to stand. And every week, a nice guy comes over to see if I'm okay.
You okay? You are so pretty. I am a nice guy.
Are you?
1, 2, 3, 4. I thought we had a connection.
Okay. How old am I? What are my hobbies? What's my name? Sorry, maybe that one's too hard.
Cassandra? We were in class together at Forest. You would have been a great doctor. What happened?
I left under unusual circumstances. You remember what happened, right? Why I dropped out. I'm not the only one who didn't believe it.
We get accusations like this all the time.
Who needs brains? They never did a girl any good.
I'm so sorry I didn't go with her.
You gotta let it go.
What are you gonna do?
I don't know.
Why do you guys have to ruin everything? We were kids.
If I hear that one more time,
I have to give him the benefit of the doubt.
I was hoping you'd feel differently by now.
It's every guy's worst nightmare getting accused like that.
Can you guess what every woman's worst nightmare is? I wanted to be a doctor my whole life. Lately, I've been feeling like I might want to get back into it.
Okay. So, I'm going to stop the share. There we go. So this is a very interesting. It's dark, even though there's this sort of candy-colored, very pop aesthetic to it. It is a revenge drama. So the plot, in short, is about this young woman named Cassie, whose best and only friend is sexually assaulted while they're in medical school, and she commits suicide. So Cassie takes it upon herself to revenge her friend, not just on the sort of perpetrators themselves, but everybody who kind of allowed it to happen. So the college administrator and, the woman who sort of slut shamed her friend, and the guy who stood by and filmed it on his phone. And so it's not, necessarily about the death of romance, but I think it also is a film that could never have been made prior to Me Too. It's very a sort of post-Me Too film. A female director, a female star, a female production company. So a very sort of woman-led and woman kind of directed narrative, which makes it, I think, in some ways unusual. So it is a story that goes places that I never expected. It took me by surprise, and I've seen a lot of film, and it also has divided, audiences and critics quite profoundly, shall we say. And I think when a film is that divisive, it's poking at some, sore spots. And it's done a couple of other really interesting things in that when it first came out, the critic who reviewed it at Sundance, a male critic, and he was sort of calling out Carey Mulligan, who's the lead actress, for not being femme fatale enough to sort of carry this role, and whether she was miscast, and he sort of wanders into this pretty fraught territory. So Mulligan came out and said, I don't accept this. This is objectifying. This is sexist, and I want an apology. So Variety actually issued an apology for the review, and that sort of firmly divided critical circles about whether that was the right thing to do. And there were some people saying, an actor's, arsenal is her face, is her body. And, as a critic, you have every right to kind of talk about that. And then there were people on the other side saying, this is a step forward, and this is going to change, film criticism forever. And so there are those films where you think, well, maybe this is going to change this. This is going to sort of, again, sort of reset the playing field. But the funny thing is that keeps kind of happening over and over again. Like there will be a film that will come out and people will say, well, this is going to change everything. And it doesn't necessarily work that way. And there was actually a documentary that came out in 2019 called This Changes Everything. And it was executive produced by Geena Davis. And she really puts her shoulder to the wheel because before she actually produced this film, she'd kind of stumbled over the fact, almost by accident, I think, that a large part of film and television and media that are produced for young children are predominantly feature male characters, male voices, male narrators. And she just sort of, she was watching a lot of kids' television with her daughter at the time and sort of thought, in a film like Finding Nemo, why are all the fish boys? And so she started, the Geena Davis Institute for Gender and Media, and took it upon herself to, fund a bunch of studies to actually have the hard stats, the numbers that people couldn't sort of refute to say, oh, no, you're just complaining, or that's, just purely anecdotal. She actually had the numbers. And one of the things that she says in the film that I thought was actually quite interesting is, other than the fact that the characters in these films and television shows are disproportionately male, she says, we're teaching them that girls and women don't take up half the space in the world. And if the few female characters that we do see are marginalized or worse, sexualized, that sends an even clearer message to audiences about what's expected of women in society. And these are films and media messages that are aimed at very, very young audiences under the age of 5. So before you have any kind of media literacy skills with which to kind of take apart, the stuff that you're kind of imbibing, completely. So she assembles just an amazing cast of women filmmakers and actresses, and who are all talking about not just the sort of political ramifications, but also their own personal experiences. So, there's Kate Blanchett and Meryl Streep and Gina Davis and like Viola Davis, like everybody is in this film. And one of the films that they kind of use as a sort of case study is Thelma and Louise, because when it was first released, I think it was 1991 that it came out. Again, it was one of those films that people, said, oh, this is going to change everything. This is going to show that women can carry like a blockbuster, that women, can be heroes. And, this is like a game changer in terms of like how films are marketed, how films, are conceived. And I actually remember going to see it in Vancouver. I don't remember how I got free tickets. It was before it was like, even released. So it was a preview. And so I didn't know anything about it. Like I had absolutely no knowledge walking in. And I think I was like, I don't know, my early 20s and, in this horrific relationship with a terrible boyfriend. And when I saw this film, I had just like this incredibly, it was really cathartic and really just a visceral experience. And, at one point I thought, I think I'm going to barf in the middle of this film, because it had impacted me so much to see some of your things that you were experiencing as a young woman up there on, on the big silver screen. And, you come out of a film like that kind of stumbling blind out of it because it's just so overwhelming. So a lot of the women who are in the documentary are talking about, getting their start in the industry and all the various things that they kind of, had to go through on a personal level. And some of them are, really funny, and some of them are really horrific. Meryl Streep talking about being in Kramer versus Kramer, and all of the men who are, in the production say, well, what would a woman do? What would a woman do in the situation? And she was sort of sitting there, well, I tell you about it. But of course, nobody asked her, right? Nobody consulted her. And you see it happen time and time again. Like I remember watching this panel discussion about Terrence Malick's film, Tree of Life, when it came out. And, a large part of the film is about motherhood. And there was this panel of, I think, 10 different film critics, and every one of them was a man. And they were talking about, motherhood. I just thought, okay, this is completely insane. Like, did you never think to maybe ask, maybe one woman or maybe even 2 women if they could be on the panel and, speak to something that they had actually experienced? But no. So the funny thing about the documentary is, it's a very sort of, cri de coeur rallying cry, and, sort of builds to this incendiary finale. And then it cuts to the credits, and it's actually made by a man. And you think, wait a minute, like after you have this whole narrative about getting, more women involved in making, telling their stories and directing films, like, could you not find like a single woman who could direct the film? And, the allyship is great. That's all wonderful. But at the same time, it was like, oh, okay, come on. But the one thing that kind of really remained with me after watching that documentary was something that I think Reese Witherspoon says at the very beginning, where she says, the basis of your values is determined by the first images that you see as a child. And when it comes to film and television and media images, the fact that, so many of them are predominantly created by men and are about men, and that women are kind of excised from the picture is just hugely problematic. So again, like, even though there are these sort of steps forward, and then there's a, backlash, and then there's another couple of steps forward, like it is a sort of, ebb and flow. And even something, I think I was reading an article in The Guardian on the weekend because they were talking about the Britney Spears documentary and the sort of the 1990s and why they were so particularly harsh on women. And the speculation, or what the author was sort of, floating, was that this was very much a reaction and a backlash to the rise of the sort of riot girl culture of, women wanting inclusion, women wanting to be part of, the sort of media zeitgeist, and then the sort of, kickback from lad culture. And you see it, in films like American Pie and all these sort of really raunchy kind of gross sex comedies that came out at the time. So, one step forward, 3 steps back, 2 steps sideways. But it does make me think of something that Maya Angelou said, where she said, you do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, you do better. And I think that's where we are at the moment, which is why something like International Women's Day is so necessary and so important, because, the battle is not over. The battle is still raging. And, we have these kind of fresh troops going in, like Chloe Zhao or, Emerald Fennell, who are armed with these new ways of telling stories and new narratives and new ideas and, a fresh perspective. And the best thing that I think we can do as audience members is to really actively support their work. And as a critic, I'm trying to write about female-led films as much as I possibly can, not because they're, female-led, but because they are really, really great works of art. And these are amazing, extraordinary storytellers and artists. But, you have to sort of, again, circle back to your own sort of personal struggles that you're fighting, in terms of like kind of digging out that stuff that's kind of embedded bone deep in terms of how you, conceive of your place in the world as a woman, and how you can, conceive of, versus how you conceive of a man's place in the world. And sometimes it's very, very funny when you kind of realize that, again, the culture has shifted almost, without you realize, or without you knowing. And I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who had this new boyfriend, and we were sort of yakking away. She's quite a bit younger than I am. And she was talking about how when they were first together, he asked her for her consent before he kissed her. And I thought, what a bunch of nerds. And then I thought, no, wait a minute, like, this is actually a good thing. And, somebody forcibly kissing you, even if it's, somebody like John Wayne, is not great. And it's something that you kind of have to let go of, those older ideas and those older things that you've been carrying on to, or holding on to forever, since you were a little kid or a young woman. And I think in kind of having that process of letting go, you really sort of open the door, open a sort of new way to having fresh ideas and new perspectives, and other things kind of come in to take its place. And ultimately, to me, that, is a very hopeful thing. And it's something that I think about a lot when I'm watching films. So I'm really kind of curious to know or hear other people's thoughts as well. So I'd like to kind of throw it open and see, hear from you guys about, your experiences in the sort of media world at the moment, because it's something that we all partake of, right, in a very kind of active fashion. And film, in that way, I think is because it's accessible and it's very democratic, and people feel like they have every right to have an opinion about a film. And I think that is actually a great thing, because it leads to a very sort of fulsome and lively kind of discussion sometimes about those issues that are not always in the public eye, but film can kind of bring them into the public eye in a much more kind of pronounced fashion. So let's hear it. If anyone has something that they want to talk about.
Yeah, I would.
Sure.
Yeah. So I watched Promising Young Woman.
Yep.
And I was on the edge of my seat. I was trying to get as much in for the Golden Globes as I could before they came on.
Yep.
But I thought it was extremely powerful. And I think it really revealed white collar male misogyny probably to a T, especially in the American male sororities in the States, and you know, the whole date rape, the drugs and that, and it was done in such a way that, I mean, it was gripping, and I think that it should be used in somewhat for young girls to see. Like, I mean, it was revenge, and maybe men have to realize maybe revenge might happen. I don't know, but I really did think it was it really made me think, and I thought it was very revealing. And then your clip on that John Wayne one, I thought, good God, no wonder women thought that they should put up with violence. So yeah, you've made some excellent points. I've been completely enthralled with it. So so just backing up your promising young woman thing, I was really interesting because I haven't had a chance to talk to a friend about this movie. So so thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. Actually, yeah, I had a call from the film studio the other day because they were petitioning before the Critics' Choice Awards, and they're like, "So, what do you know? How do you feel about the film?" And it's kind of feel a bit funny in those situations. But you know, it was one of the genuine surprises from this year.
Yeah,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I kind of thought, I was thinking it might win an award, but it didn't. But I still think it's in the running. It's a pretty powerful take.
And I do think, you know, it felt quite new, like genuinely new to me in terms of how its story was structured. And, you know, again, from a very different perspective. And one of them, I can't remember who it was in the documentary. I think it's Julie Dash, who made Daughters of the Dust. And she said, you know, women place cameras differently. They have a different perspective. They have a different way of kind of, you know, almost kind of constructing cinematic language and cinematic. So it's something that you, unless you know, have a female director and a female writer and sometimes even a female crew, you don't have that kind of new kind of way of telling stories. So I think you actually, you know, you benefit greatly, or, you know, the culture benefits greatly from that sort of infusion of new content and new perspectives and new, you know, directions. So to me, it was very exciting.
It was.
Yeah, it is interesting to kind of rewatch The Quiet Man. I hadn't actually seen it in a long time. And it's still, it's quite funny. And, you know, and she's so feisty that there's certain things where you're kind of almost kind of tempted to kind of forgive some of the more kind of, you know, overtly misogynist moments. But it is problematic in many ways, but even though it's charming.
Those that, you know, films like that in Anglo-Saxon culture, and then they start attacking, you know, the extreme ISIS, or, you know, the Muslim thing. I thought, were we really any different?
Not really.
It was
yeah,
like women were supposed to submit and do as they were told, and the male had all the power. I never can see much difference between the different religions and that. Like, I think it's there.
yeah.
Doesn't matter what culture you're in.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, go ahead.
I was interested in, am I on speaker? I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
I was reading an article, I think it was also in The Guardian, about Keira Knightley, and saying how she would not do sex scenes anymore unless the director was a woman. Because she just felt that the sex scenes, the men around were directing it the way they wanted it to be, but it wasn't the way a woman would want it to be, you know. So it was interesting that someone, of course, she can have that kind of power because she is, you know, she's pretty famous now and she's older and she's more mature about it all. But it was interesting. I wonder what kind of impact that might have going forward.
Well, I mean, I think that's the kind of interesting thing about the Me Too movement is that a lot of, you know, it came into the sort of, I think, sort of cultural, you know, into the broader cultural sort of realm, because the women who were sort of behind it were, you know, incredibly powerful and incredibly, you know, they were coming from a place of privilege, and they could kind of asked for what they needed. But even in spite of that, like, one of the things that's quite shocking in This Changes Everything is, I think it's Sharon Stone. And she's, even at the height of her career, where she was making a film, and the director would say, well, come here and sit on my lap and I'm going to give you notes. And she'd say, would you ask like Dustin Hoffman to come and sit on your lap to like give you notes? And if she, was not obedient enough, she would be kind of sent back to her trailer. And I mean, that was kind of the horrific thing about, the Weinstein sagas, that not only did he, abuse and, assault women, but he essentially ended careers from so many different people if they just didn't, do exactly what he wanted them to do.
Yeah.
I had a question about something you said earlier about young children and the media that they watch and the films that they watch. I am blessed to have a nephew who works for Disney Animation, Canadian, and has worked on all of as both the animator and director on all the last, I don't know how many, the Frozen series and everything else, but that's irrelevant. What is relevant is how Disney Animation has tried to change the portrayal of women and girls through animation. And they do use Jennifer Lee's she's won Academy Awards for directing. And what was interesting to me following my nephew Trent's career is the backlash for changing how women are portrayed, along with the insertion of cultural diversity into animation films and shorts. There is a huge backlash from people, and negative, often what you see in films. So a lot of the remarks about Frozen and Frozen 2 were, are they lesbians? There has to be something wrong, right, for the woman to be strong. And what they were trying to do, with my understanding, is portray role models for younger children that see women in a positive light, and not needing to be rescued like they had been in previous Disney animation. Yet there's this constant struggle for the public to accept that.
Yeah.
And as sitting as a member of the audience, reading some of the critical reviews, we have so far to go.
Yeah.
I don't know where it can be done, but it is, even when you watch these new animated, there's another one, forgive me, Trent, is it Rava, the dragon one? Yeah. I don't have children. I only have him. But anyways, it's like, that's again a woman superhero for those of you who have grandchildren and whatnot in that. And again, a woman in a position of power, but they're also trying to insert cultural diversity. It doesn't always go well.
No, it doesn't. And I think I was thinking about the film Brave, where there was a woman director, and she actually had to end up sharing co-credit with a male director at the end, but it was her film. And she was very, very clear about why she wanted to make the main character a princess, right? To sort of subvert that very idea. But in order to kind of get the story, greenlit, and to actually get it made, you had to say, well, here's this nice story about a princess. Yeah. And then, once you kind of have that sort of thing in motion, then you can kind of, work with some of those ideas and, again, subvert some of those cliches. But first you have to kind of get your foot in the door. So again,
that's into the paper bag princess.
Yes, it is. Literature, it's a paper bag. So what they've been trying to do with animated film is basically the paper bag princess is change that, and also introduce, like one of the shorts that he did was One Small Step, with a young girl who's Asian who wants to be an astronaut. And it's the cutest little thing, but she's Asian, and it shows an Asian lifestyle and her dream to be an astronaut, but how her culture basically says, that's because she's a woman, that's not obtainable,
Yeah.
and how she has to overcome that
Mhm.
and to live her dream. And so there are lots of inspiring examples, but the shock is seeing how it's perceived by public, and how some members of our society have to find a way to dismiss those efforts, and not move forward. The challenge you mentioned, you know, one step forward, three steps back. And because I'm a bit younger, I find it amazing. Like we talk about how far we've come, and I've been watching, you know, all the news stories lately and thinking, oh my Lord, like forgive me, I probably will swear and go, we haven't come far at all. Like from my perspective, being a bit on the younger side, thinking, like, you know, I don't see the progress that someone else may see, like my mother would have seen and experienced.
It's, you know, it's ongoing. And, you know, I think you get to the point sometimes where when you're, you know, in a critics organization and you're like one or, you know, two women in that group and thinking, and you're lobbying hard for the films that you think, you know, are important and are really worthwhile. But even the numbers do not help, right? Like I think in terms of actual representation in critical or in critics organizations, like men outnumber women, I think 70%. They're largely usually about 70% male. So, yeah.
I had a question about the Sundance critic. That was the critic that the critique, Carey Mulligan.
Yeah.
Did he have anything else to say, or was that the only thing he had to say? And that he
it wasn't an entirely unbalanced review, and you know, he'd sort of written. What's his name again? Oh Lord, Dennis, I think. Shoot, it'll come to me in a minute. Anyways, but you know, and so he kind of went on after he sort of critiqued the way she looked to, you know, praise her performance. So it wasn't like he'd kind of panned the film entirely. He just sort of, his sort of main point was that, you know, she would, like if Margot Robbie, who was the producer of the film, had played that role, but somehow it would have been more appropriate. But I think the whole point of that film is that she's not a femme fatale, right? That she is like, you know, yeah, an ordinary woman in taking on this sort of form of drag almost to kind of entice men in, you know, in bars, and so that the whole point of it is kind of that she's not that person. She's like taking on this, you know.
and do you think, I mean, that he missed that point, and obviously his editors did too?
Yeah, well, I think that was the other problem, was that, you know, issuing an apology after the review has already come out is kind of like, you know, horse barn door kind of scenario. Like maybe you should have edited it, you know, sufficiently before you kind of threw this
And I
dude to the
also
wolves.
have a question.
Mm-hmm.
In the old days, I mean, movies were made by factories, and there was a code, and I remember movies from my childhood, and they were a bit candy floss, but they were sort of safe. I mean, I looked upon them as safe,
Mm-hmm.
and our parents did too. Whereas now, and as you're right, and especially in the 90s, things got really bad. I mean, didn't American Pie win an Oscar?
I don't think it won an Oscar, but, you know, it spawned like 4 sequels or 5 sequels.
And I thought that was just a revolting movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I did notice that the whole sort of changes, that the whole movie industry just became very raunchy, mostly at that time. So in some ways, as you say, there's a pendulum. So do you think the pendulum is going to swing back to more?
I sure hope not. I mean, I think that's the kind of, you know, again, that sort of rise and fall in terms of like, you know, it'll swing this way and then it'll swing back. Mm-hmm. But I think if you have, you know, enough women in the industry to kind of bring about a more sort of systemic change, that it's harder and harder to do that, to have those really kind of violent reactive swings back and forth, because, you know, women just won't stand for it anymore. So I hope that's shifting.
And so do you watch movies differently?
I do now, yeah. I mean, that was the thing that I keep sort of, you know, whether it's you're watching an older film or, you know, screeners that are coming out. And I think I have really noticed, you know, a definite shift in terms of the sort of breadth of storytelling. Like Nomadland is kind of an interesting case in point, because Frances McDormand, who's the kind of the lead actor in the film, and, you know, she's not beautiful. She's not made, you know, lovely or attractive. Like the whole point is that she's very kind of unvarnished and very, you know, it's quite, you know, a sort of elegiac film in many ways. But she's also a hero, right? And she's allowed to kind of be this sort of, you know, fairly plain, downtrodden woman, but she's still heroic in her own sort of private, you know, way. And that to me, again, is another indication that there are different stories that are out there, and they're finally being told in a really kind of, you know, in a wider fashion, and again, picking up awards like left, right, and center. So there is that kind of cultural vindication, and I think that in itself is hard to kind of take back. So, you know, if you've picked up a bunch of awards, then, you know, usually your next film is easier to make. So they do have a, you know, they have a role to play for sure.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
I can't see anyone except Strip on the side. Everything else is gone on the screen completely.
I'd like to ask a question.
Sure.
Yeah, it's not so much a question as an observation. When I was a kid, and that's a long time ago now, all my high school teachers were male, and all my elementary school teachers were female.
Mm-hmm.
That anyone else's experience, roughly?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's shifted because I've been a teacher now, and many of those positions at the senior level or at the high school level are now taken by women. And I'm thinking that some of that role modeling is eventually going to come through for the girls that are going through high school. Hopefully it's going to continue to be something that women are in fact getting equally as much time in front of the classroom as the men are. But what bothered me about a study I did once was that the kind of learning that girls do is often copying what they see in front of them. And boys have a more difficult job of learning because their first learning is their gender identity when they're very little. And they learn by putting pieces together because most of their caregivers are female and they don't get to look at a whole lot of males that they can copy. And it disadvantages girls when they just copy. They really need that ability to take things apart and put it together. And that's what we're doing, I think, now more. And that's what possibly is what's bothering some of the elements in society that see us as being unfeminine when we do something like that. You know, and mostly it's men. And I think they probably need some sensitivity training, send them all back to school or something.
Yes, let's put them in a camp.
Okay, I'll be editing that from the final thing that we post on the YouTube channel because I don't want to get complaints.
Oh, well, that was a joke, but it's okay.
What else? Questions? I can't see anybody who's out there, but.
Ava. But she's muted.
Oh, who?
Here, Ava, there you go. I've unmuted you, Ava.
I wasn't brought up in films. In fact, the first film that my mother took me to was Auntie Mame, and she was shocked because in Auntie Mame's story, Auntie Mame has this living room with the children there, and she's talking about sex. And my mother was so upset about this. I must have been about 6. I didn't notice that at all, but I really wanted that little car that little boy had. But so having not been brought up on film, I've been brought up on reading. And today there are oodles of books now being written about girls being in doctors, lawyers, merchants, the whole bit. And I think this is important. And I think that we as women are not concentrating. Many of you are still stuck in your kitchen and are not out there working with children. And I think you can work with both male and female children because we also have to talk to boys about respecting girls and young women. They don't think as their mother as a woman. They think of her as a mother. And they treat her differently than if they would treat a woman. So I found this very interesting tonight, Dorothy. And I'm glad. I met you through Tai. Remember, I did call you about coming and speaking, because it was you who brought my attention to the article that you wrote, Silent No More. That is, Silence No More says that is putting the blame on women who are in these horrible situations. And again, from my point of view, we are not working with these young women who have not the money or the support to go on to better education and getting into skilled jobs. And so they're stuck in a situation. And since I did that research, I've had at least a half a dozen women who have come forward to me and said, thank you for bringing it to our attention. So yeah, tonight has been most interesting to hear you talk about the different films, because in my day, from books, I went to the stage and to London, to Shakespeare, and all this on stage sort of thing. So thank you very much.
Oh, well, you're most welcome.
Anyone else there out in blank land? Yes. Well, maybe we should wrap it up. We are a little bit later than we thought we'd be, but it was a very interesting discussion, Dorothy, and thank you so much for bringing your perspective.
Oh, my pleasure.
Our evening, it was great. Yes.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a great, lovely to talk to you all.
Thank you.
So Val, are you there, Val?
Yes, I'm here. So this is wrapping up our event. And each year in the past, when we've had a live event, we've given to various groups. Previously, we've given to the Crisis Center. And the last time we were live in 2020, just before we closed down, we had a refugee organization based in Parksville that we donated some of our door proceeds to. And I'm very happy to say that they now have a family from Syria in Parksville. So they're all very joyous about that, because you know how fraught that situation can be. So rather than taking money this year, we sort of thought that was too complicated. I am going to encourage you to give some money to your favorite organization in lieu of a donation to our IWD event. And I would like to thank this year my fellow Canadian Federation women, Sonia Felix for heading up the event tonight, Victoria Morris for being our Zoom and YouTube host, Eva Hilborn for suggesting Dorothy come speak to us, Sheila Reed, Jackie Russell, committee members, Debbie Wetmore for the video link, and Brenda Corey for our social media postings. Thank you very much. And with that, I would like to wish you a very good evening and view films differently now. And happy International Women's Day. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
How can we?
Bye, everybody.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
All right, so our next meeting is the beginning of April. I believe it's April the 8th, but I will be contacting you. Okay, good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.